Well, hey there, hockey friendos. I think if you're one of the elite 30,000 people who've ever watched me on YouTube, you will know I'm not somebody who likes to sit in front of a camera. However, I am going back to sea in a couple of days, and I thought it would be fun to do an actual final predictions, because my previous videos for the run-up to the season weren't really predictions. The Vibes video is kind of more like where all the franchises are at the moment. So this is going to be more like my just predictions of what I expect will happen this season specifically. By the time you watch this, I will be already away at sea. I'm planning on releasing this about 3 weeks after the season starts. So by then, all of this will be totally out of date and probably will show how badly my predictions are going. But it is what it is. As you can see, I'm incredibly uncomfortable in front of a camera. I usually have a script. I'm not doing any of that today. I'm kind of doing a hockey guy kind of thing. More because I don't really have time to do like a heavily edited project. So we're going to go through all 32 teams and we're going to see where everyone's at and where I think everyone, or how everyone will do this season. I have got a little plan in front of me in that I have made a prediction and I'm just going to go through each team one by one. I'm going to be using the Daily Face-Offs projected lines as my guide, and yeah, we're going to go through team by team. I'm going to try and keep it brief because I know people will not watch 73-minute long videos. My last video just tanked in terms of audience retention, so I'm going to try and keep it to about a minute or two for each team, and you know, that will still end up being around 60 minutes. I'm also gonna have a beer because it's late now. Okay, so I think the fairest way to do this is to start from the bottom and the hardest team to talk about out of the way. Unfortunately, there's no easy way to talk about the Columbus Blue Jackets in just pure hockey terms. They are a franchise that has had just an ungodly amount of tragedy surrounding them. And obviously this offseason we lost Johnny Gaudreau. And so it's difficult to talk about Columbus in just purely hockey terms. But they will be taken to the ice this year. And so you do have to look at how they're going to fare. And I don't think I'm unique in the hockey community, as even though I'm an Islanders fan, I'll be rooting for Columbus on nights they're not playing for against the Islanders. With that said, I do think Columbus are going to finish bottom in the East. I think they were probably going to struggle anyway, but they've lost their star player. With that said, I do think with all the emotion that is going to be behind Columbus at the start of the year, there is the possibility that they will come out the gates fast. It will be interesting to see how Columbus deal with the emotional toll. As I say, I think they'll come out quite fast. I think they could do well in the first month. Ultimately, though, as a team, they're very young. They're very inexperienced. Looking at the lines, they're very thin at the moment in terms of both experience and talent, especially like if you look at their back end. Yeah, I mean, they got Jordan Harris in the trade that sent Patrick Laine to Montreal. Obviously, the big issue that Columbus had last season was goaltending. Elvis Merzlikins has been very open in the fact that he wants to leave Columbus. The problem is his contract is just not very appealing for anyone in the league. And as such, he will be backstopping Columbus again this year. And the thing is, if he wants to be traded, he needs to improve his play. I think Columbus ultimately want Tarasov to take over as the number one. So it would be in Columbus's interest for him to pick up his play. Ultimately, though, I have Columbus at the bottom. I think they will start fast. I think as the season wears on, it's a long season. It's a long time to be able to harness that emotion. It's going to get them so far. And then ultimately, I think they will start to fade away. And I suspect Columbus won't only finish bottom in the East. I have a feeling they'll finish bottom in the league when you look at how San Jose and Chicago have improved over the postseason. The one thing with Columbus, obviously Monahan signed there to be reunited with Gaudreau. It's going to be interesting to see how he gets on this year. I think, he's going to have a great group around him. He could do really well, and it's good to see Boone Jenner getting off of that centre. He's not really been that great there. And that top line of Monahan, Jenner, and Fantilli could be quite good. Next up after Columbus is Montreal. I have Montreal finishing 15th in the East. Montreal are a team I give really good ratings in my Vibes video. I think that they are a team will come good in a year or two time, and it's possible even with the way the East is that they could get themselves close to playoffs this year. I have my doubts about how good Montembeault is. I have my doubts about the centres at Montreal, like Nick Suzuki's their top centre. He's a good player. Is he a top line centre? Possibly not. You've got Dak on the second line. He's potentially a better player. Depth wise, they still look very thin after the second line. It's a team I think are improving. I think that in a couple of years' time, especially with some of the teams in the East seeing the sort of end of their success, Montreal are a team I think will be good in a year or two time. However, this season I think it will be more of the same as last year, finishing towards the bottom of the East and ultimately picking up a decent prospect, and that will probably be the best that Montreal can hope for. So I have Montreal finishing in 15th in the East. So after Montreal, I have Philadelphia. Philadelphia, obviously last year, were very close to making the playoffs out of absolutely nowhere. And if you were to look at the team this year, you would say they've gotten better. They've got Matvei Michkov. He's going to be the big star. He's the bookmaker's favourite for the Calder Trophy. With that said, with losing Carter Hart last year, for obvious reasons, they've not been able to plug that gap. I'm not particularly convinced by Fedotov. Urson's just okay. He's young. He might get better. He's not going to get that much better this season. I think Philadelphia are going to regress this year. However, it might be for their benefit to take a season where they are just a proper rebuilding team. I think there was too much noise around them last year, and it kind of interfered with their development, especially the way it all ended. I think that they would do well to have a year where there isn't that pressure on them. And as I say, you've got Michkov, you've got the bones of a very good team. I think, like Montreal, Philadelphia will be a very good team in a year or two's time. I just think at the moment they're maybe a bit too young. I think they could get bullied a lot. Their defense really doesn't look too great at the moment. Jamie Drysdale is a question of, is he going to stay fit? And as I say, the goaltending is also a big question. I mean, is it going to be Urson or Fedotov? You've got the drama surrounding Ryan Johansson, Ryan Ellis. It's a interesting team. You've also got the Russian goalie, whose name's escaping me, who's refusing to report to Philadelphia or their Lehigh Valley affiliate. So interesting team. There's some interesting stuff going on in the background. The other problem that Philadelphia have is Tortorella seems to have kind of a sell-by date with players. Comes in like a bull in a china shop, and he's great for a few years, and then he starts to get players just becoming deaf to him. It's going to be interesting to see if Tortorella is the man that take this young team forward. I have my doubts. I know Tortorella is very popular. I find his shtick a bit tiring, and whether he can be the guy who takes this young core on is a question to be seen. There are players who don't like playing for him. Philadelphia seem to have a lot of players that are quite contentious, what with Cutter Gauthier and Ryan Johansson. Obviously, Johansson and Tortorella had a history prior. Just a very odd situation. But for this season, Philly are going to finish somewhere down at the bottom of the Eastern Conference. And as I say, I've got them in 14th. Okay, after Philly, we get maybe a little more spicy. I'm very cold on Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh are a team near total collapse. And I think that they will be a team that really struggles to be competitive. Not because of Crosby, obviously. Crosby's signed. You've also got Carlson. Right now, their top line is Anthony Beauvillier and Brian Rust with Sidney Crosby. That's concerning. You've also got Evgeny Malkin, which it's a question of whether he's going to come back to where he was before. Same with Chris Letang. They just both look like they are reaching the end of their careers, and they are. But their play last year was poor, and if they continue on that trajectory, you know, you have two very totemic players that aren't going to be much use in a team where there's just not a lot to like. Lars Eller's a good player. Michael Bunting's a useful player. I mean, yeah, that fourth line looks terrifyingly bad. Matt Gretzlick on your top line, top defensive pairing, and Brian Graves. I just don't think this Pittsburgh team's going to be very good. And on top of the parts and pieces that they have, they also have Tristan Jarry and Alex Nedeljkovic, who aren't very consistent. And yeah, I actually wouldn't be surprised if Philly do better than Pittsburgh. I've actually created what I call the cone of uncertainty, which I don't know where I've got that phrase from. I'm sure I've heard it from somewhere before. These are the teams that I think could make the playoffs, and I did put Pittsburgh in there. But the more I look at it, the more I just think Pittsburgh are going to not only miss the playoffs, but miss them by quite a way. And the only way that doesn't happen is if not only Crosby plays like last year, because I think Crosby will play like he did last year, but if Malkin and Letang can like rekindle form from years ago, and if maybe say Rutger McGrorty, whose name is an absolute nightmare to say, if he can come in and actually take off, I have my doubts. He's obviously a very good player, but his skating is questionable. And even when I was cutting up my video for the Vibes video and I was watching footage of him at the college level, he's not a great skater. He looks slow, and I think it's going to take him a while to adapt to the NHL. And so as a result, I just don't see a lot to like, and I wouldn't actually be surprised if Philly and Montreal were better than Pittsburgh. I've got them in 13th. I could see Pittsburgh finishing as low as 15th. Okay, so after Pittsburgh, we're talking 12th place. And 12th place I'm giving to Detroit. I think there are people who think Detroit could be a playoff team this year, and I've certainly got them in my cone of uncertainty. Detroit are going to live and die by if Dylan Larkin stays fit, because they were poor when he wasn't fit. I mean, on paper, Detroit are a funny team. On paper, they actually have the parts and pieces that could be very good. I mean, that top line of DeBrincat, Larkin, Raymond is excellent. They've managed to tie up Lucas Raymond and Moritz Seider. You've got Patrick Kane, but once you get out of that sort of top two lines, and even then JT Compher as your second line center, it gets very weak. And you look at the defense as well. You've got Moritz Seider. After Seider, there's not an awful lot in that team. Simon Edvinsson, he looks like he's going to be a very good player. The Detroit team, it's a team that lacks an identity at the moment. You know, they're years and years deep into the Yzer plan, and I know Steve Yzerman hates that phrase, but it looks like a bit of a mess at the moment. You've got a very old Patrick Kane is one of the centerpieces of your offense. The defense is a bit of a mishmash of players. You've got 4-5 NHL caliber goaltenders, but all of them NHL sort of caliber backups, I guess. I mean, Cam Talbot is probably going to be their number one to start the season, and Alex Lyon in backup. There's just not a lot to like. They're the kind of team who I can see picking up wins against lesser teams. I don't see them being as close to the playoffs this year as they were last year. And that's a big issue because I wonder how much leeway Yzerman has. I've heard from some people saying that he will get years and years, but what he's done so far is a bit directionless. And obviously he inherited a really bad situation. Like they'd gone all in to maintain this like 25-year playoff run, and in a salary cap league, you're always going to have a crash. And the longer you manage to prolong that success, the harder the crash. It's been brutal for Detroit, and they were a very old team right at the end of that run as well. So they've sort of lost everything, and they've been like kind of getting rid of all their picks and prospects to try and keep that run going. And then obviously we are now into the, I think, 8th season of rebuild compared to say Philadelphia, Montreal, Buffalo. Even the Detroit rebuild, I mean, to be fair to Detroit, the Buffalo rebuild has been forever, but the Detroit rebuild just doesn't seem to be where these other franchises are. So yeah, I've got them finishing in 12th. Okay, so in 11th, I have the Washington Capitals. And this is the hardest team to pin down. They were the hardest team to pin down for my Vibes video. They are such an odd team. I don't think anyone has turned their roster around or roster over as much as Washington have. They seem to be a team like very slowly, glacially going into like a rebuild, but like just trying to push it out as long as possible to like get Alex Ovechkin his scoring record. And then last year, partly because they made the playoffs, they seem to have pivoted very slightly. They didn't really have the parts to do like a big pivot like, say, Nashville, especially when you look at the state of the Capitals' cap space at the moment. So we've got this kind of really weird mishmash of players. So even though I've got Washington in 11th, they could finish 6th, they could finish last. It's really hard to predict with this team. And it all really pivots on a few things. It really depends which Alex Ovechkin comes out of the blocks. Do we get the pre-All-Star game Ovechkin of last year? Or do we get the post-All-Star Ovechkin? Because if we get the post-All-Star Ovechkin, they'll be fine. On that second line, you've got Pierre-Luc Dubois. I mean, how many opportunities is this guy going to get? This has got to be his last opportunity. And for Washington, if he doesn't do well here, they are never going to be able to shift his contract. Connor McMichael, he's probably going to make a big step up this year. And then, yeah, you get that bottom six. I mean, Nick Dowd, Taylor Radish, they're Brandon Duhaime, they're fine players. They're not anything special. They brought in Jacob Chitrin on the back end. They're just okay. I've got to admit, I do quite like the tandem they've got in net. I think Charlie Lindgren kind of had a coming out party last year. He was great. And Logan Thompson is a very serviceable 1B. I suspect that Lindgren and Thompson are going to probably share the net this year. I think that's a very powerful, a very strong goaltending tandem. If they get the kind of post All-Star Ovechkin, and you get the goaltending, and you get a Pierre-Luc Dubois who actually looks engaged and interested, then the Caps could be a good team. However, I can also see a situation where all of what I just said doesn't happen, and they really struggle. And again, that's why they are in my cone of uncertainty teams. So yeah, I've got Washington finishing at 11th. Now, the eagle-eyed of you might have noticed I have not mentioned the Ottawa Senators. And that's because I think Ottawa are going to improve this year. However, I don't think they're going to make the playoffs because I have Ottawa in 10th. They won't have Joonas Korpisalo in net this year, and that will be a huge boon. I suspect Linus Ullmark will be better even if he isn't the Ullmark of Boston, even if they get the Ullmark of Buffalo. They will be a better team. You've got a great top line in Brady Tkachuk, Tim Stützle, Claude Giroux. But again, as I said in my Vibes video, they seem to be a team that really struggles to turn up. They're also a team infamous for their slow starts. If they can come out at the start of the year and actually put some decent points up on the board early, they could actually be a team. I think they're going to be a team that are going to be on the bubble. I can see them being on the bubble most of the year. They've got a nice second line as well with Norris, Pinto and Batherson, Grieg, and they brought in David Perron. That's a nice group. I mean, Nick Cousins on the third line I find a bit unlikely. They're a decent team. They have a decent collection of players. Their back end's a bit and that's going to be the biggest challenge for Allmark, is how he's going to deal with playing behind that kind of defense instead of the defense he had in Boston. But with that said, I do believe Ottawa are going to be there or thereabouts. However, as I said, I'm releasing this a couple of weeks after the start of the season, so that it's out a couple of weeks after I'm away at sea. For all I know, Ottawa could have lost every single game by then, because that would be a very Ottawa thing to do. There's good stories coming out from Ottawa. It seems like they might finally be getting an arena built somewhere actually in Ottawa and not in a cornfield in the middle of Ontario. If that happens, they might be a team on the up. They've been a team that's really struggled to retain players, because when you're not a contender, it is a lot harder to get players to sign, and they've been far from a contender for quite a while. So it would be nice if they could get themselves back near the pointier end of the table. Again, I don't think they will make the playoffs this year. I wouldn't be shocked if they did, however. I certainly think they'll be there or thereabouts, unless they start very slowly. Okay, 9th, and it's my team, the Islanders. I don't have the Islanders making the playoffs this year. In fact, if it weren't for how weak the East is, I really don't think the Islanders would be anywhere near it. It's an old team. It's a slow team. Anthony Duclair's a nice pickup in that he's a bit quicker. That top line of Duclair, Horvat and Barzal, they might be good. There's a bit of pace there. The season sort of pivots on how good that second line will be. Brock Nelson has been pretty good for 30 goals the last couple of years. I don't think he'll get that if they've stuck him down on the second line. The thing about Brock Nelson is he's in a contract year, so it'll be interesting to see if the Islanders are out of playoff contention, if they decide to offload him. That's not something Lou Lamoriello seems to like doing. We could get some nice assets back with a sort of Nelson. I think Brock's one of my favorite players in the league at the moment, and I think for a cup contender he would be a brilliant asset to add. I don't see the point of us re-signing him after that second line, and even then Simon Holmstrom, he's a bit hit or miss. JG Pajot, Engvall Lee, that's not too bad. A lot of people are wondering how Tsiplankov will do. Again, he could be great, or he could be back in Russia by Christmas. Obviously, the identity line is done. That's been the big driver for the Islanders in the last few years. We don't have a lot of speed. We did used to have a lot of grit. Now we've only got Casey Cizikas left. I'm not quite sure what's happening with Matt Martin. I do believe he's on a PTO. If that's the case, it will only be Clutterbuck that's lost from that line. Cizikas was very good last season, actually. I think he was an underrated player. But again, he's getting on in years as well. Looking at the defense, Noah Dobson, probably one of the most underrated players in the league. I'm a big fan of Alexander Romanov. Beyond that, it's just serviceable. And that's pretty much what the Islanders are. It's a team of serviceable players that are heavily reliant on having great goaltending. And, you know, we had issues with Sorokin being fit at the end of the season. There was questions about his fitness. He now seems to be battling some sort of injury. Semyon Varlamov is getting up there in years. We've been steadily going backwards, the Islanders, the last few years. And I just haven't seen, like, with only Anthony Duclair and Maxim Tsiplankov, I don't see enough to abate that. And I think this will be the first year that the Islanders miss the playoffs in a few years. And to be honest, even if we get to the playoffs, that's as good as it gets. And I kind of feel like the team needs a kick up the arse. And for Lamoriello to stop just trying to just push us over the line. This team isn't going to ever win a Stanley Cup. So it needs turning over. I just question whether Lamoriello really wants to do that. As it is, I have the Islanders finishing in 9th, which means that we now get into the playoff teams. So in 8th, I have the Tampa Bay line in. I feel like Tampa Bay are maybe a season or two behind where Pittsburgh are. In my Vibes video, I spoke about Tampa being a team heading towards a rebuild. There are a lot of people who seem to think that they are going to be very good, that they see Jake Gensel and McDonough as adequate replacements for Sergachev and Stamkos. And for sure, that top line is one of the most potent top lines in the East, Gensel, Point and Kucherov, even minus Steve Stamkos. But once you get off that top line, you have, Conor Sheary, Anthony Cirelli, Brandon Hagel. Nick Paul's quite a good third line centre, but Cam Atkinson, Gergenson's on the 4th line. There's just the players they brought in are old. Cam Atkinson and Zemgus Gergensons are not making the team younger. I just question, minus that top line, what did Tampa Bay really bring? The main thing that they will bring this year, as we assume, is a fit Andrei Vasilevsky. That was the thing that almost derailed their season last year, was the fact that they didn't have Vasilevsky out the gates. You look at the defense now, you've got Victor Hedman, who's got to be in his late 30s, Ryan McDonough, who's getting up there in years, JJ Moser, he's a good pickup, but he's not going to give you the numbers of Sergachev, although he might stay a bit fitter. Again, Darren Radish and Nick Perbix, fine as sort of third pairing defenseman. I was, to be honest, going into this, I was going to put Tampa out of playoffs, but I think Tampa are going to remain a playoffs team for this year, maybe next year, just because the East isn't a particularly competitive conference. And that means in the playoffs, I have the Buffalo Sabres, who haven't made the playoffs in 13 years. They came very close last season out of nowhere when nobody seemed to want to take the final wildcard slots in the East, to dragging themselves back into the race. And I'm of the belief that they are going to just get themselves over the hill this year. They've just named Rasmus Dahlin their captain today, which I think is a good step. I think everyone knew it was going that way. They're a young team. They're still on the sort of rebuild, the perpetual rebuild, it seems, in Buffalo. But they are a team that is just basically getting to that point where they are going to start making playoffs, I believe. I think this is a good team. I like the top line, Tage Thompson. It is very dependent on whether Tage Thompson sort of recovers his form from a couple of seasons ago. The big step they've got is last year they kind of tried to lean into Devon Levi, and that didn't really work. In defense of Devon Levi, looking at some of the advanced stats, one of the most bizarre things was that how many good opportunities Buffalo coughed up when Levi was in there, which is just bizarre when you are trying to defend a young goalie. You would normally want to give a little bit of extra effort, and instead they seem to just sell him down the river half the time. Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen came in last year and really sort of took the net, and it'll be interesting to see if he carries on his form from last year. But the other thing is, with Lindy Ruff now behind the bench, they should become a bit more defensively organised, you would hope. And then, you've got Bowen Byram, who they picked up at the trade deadline last year, Rasmus Dahlin, Owen Power. That's a nice collection of defenders. They're not on paper any better than some of the teams I've said won't make the playoffs. But, Lindy Ruff back in Buffalo for the first time, and he was the last coach that took them into the playoffs, which shows how long ago it was. And yeah, I think UPL will be just as good this year. I think Devon Levi will come back after a year of being sort of screwed over. I think this is going to be a decent season for Buffalo, and I think this will be the year that they finally break the back of this missing the playoffs. I will say, though, that very much like Ottawa, it's very dependent on if they get off to a good start. Had they got off to a good start last season, they would have probably made the playoffs last season. Okay, in 6th, I have Carolina. Carolina have been kind of like perennial bookmakers' favourites for the President's Trophy. I think they were second favourites entering last year. This offseason has been a bit of a fire sale, not by choice, but because of contracts. And it has left them very hollowed out. You know, they've managed to retain Seth Jarvis, they managed to retain Martin Necas. They've lost a lot of parts and pieces to this top end, and I just feel like they're going to be a considerably weaker team this year. They are a team. I've put them in my zone of my cone of uncertainty because they are a team which have quite choppy goaltending in Anderson and Kochetkov. I know that a lot of people like Kochetkov. I find him a little bit unpredictable. He's a bit eccentric. I wonder how that pairing is going to fare this year. At least, hopefully, Freddie Anderson stays fit. He's obviously had some very worrying health issues in the last couple of years. They've lost a lot, and they're reliant on a lot of like vets now, like Brent Burns. Slavin's a very good defenseman. Dmitry Orlov's very serviceable. Jalen Chatfield's okay. They're just okay. I don't know if they're going to be anything better than that. I certainly don't think they're going to be a challenger for a President's Trophy this year. But again, the East is fairly weak, and even with all the talent that's been lost, I don't think they fall out of the playoff picture. Okay, so 5th. This is, I've had to kind of retcon this a little bit because, like, full disclosure, I have a bet, a 4-way bet on with the winner of every single division. And I originally had Boston to win it because I assumed, like any sane person would, that once they'd traded away Allmark, they would have, kind of figured out what they were going to do with Swayman. As I speak this sentence, he has not signed, which is very surprising. Now, as I'm going to release this a couple of weeks after I go to sea and after the season starts. So that's going to be, today's the 27th. So that's going to be a fair time away. So, by the time you see this, Swayman might have signed. However, some of the talk that Don Sweeney was talking about with mentioning December is very concerning. And if I was a Boston fan, I'd be starting to get very nervous because their season's torpedoed without Swayman, as far as I'm concerned. It's entirely possible that all this noise will help Joonas Korpisalo because the focus won't be on him. However, I don't really believe that. I think if he comes out and plays as poorly as he did for Ottawa last year, they're going to be in real trouble because I think the Boston has the best defense in the East. But there's only so much you can do if your goalie is just coughing up goals. And it's pretty much what derailed New Jersey last year. Korpisalo's had good seasons. I don't know. It's a real mess because they've gone from having easily the best 1-2 pairing in the league to potentially looking at Korpisalo and Brandon Bussi. I mean, it would probably be weaker than what they've got in Columbus. Nikita Zadorov signing, very Boston signing. Charlie McAvoy. Mason Lowry was very good last season in the playoffs. Hampus Lindholm, it's a very good defense. I mean, Andrew peaks of it, but I mean, it's a very good defense. So yeah, I have Boston finishing 5th. But again, if Korpisalo is their number 1, I don't know if they're going to finish 5th. I don't even know if they'll make the playoffs. They'll probably make the playoffs, but okay, onward. 4th. And in 4th, I have the New York Rangers. Last year's President's Trophy winners. My main reason that I've got them in 4th is I can see the Rangers taking a bit of a step back this season. Now, it's been very heavily reported that the Rangers, I believe it was Trouba, said this was the last chance for this group. Obviously, at the end of the year, you have K'Andre Miller and even bigger Igor Shesterkin, who's going to have his eyes on that Jeremy Swayman contract negotiations. They're going to be coming up to the end of their contracts. Jacob Trouba isn't going to re-sign. Everything at the moment in the Rangers is kind of dependent on if Lafreniere carries on his upward trajectory from last year, if Capo Caco can rekindle some of his earlier form. Kreider and Zibanejad are getting older. Artemi Panarin's only in his early 30s at the moment. But this team have only got so many years left in them. On paper, they're still a very good team, and I wouldn't be surprised if they did go off and win the East. I also wouldn't be surprised if they finished fourth. I don't think they finished lower than that. I think at worst, they're second in the Metropolitan. I just don't see anyone. Carolina, I don't think they're going to be very good. And then I have the Islanders. But at the same, it's a big question. I mean, obviously, with Shesterkin, you're going to have excellent goaltending. Jonathan Quick was very serviceable as a backup last year for them. It's just a team I can just see taking a back step, and all that noise around Jacob Trouba wasn't great at the start of the year. But obviously, they're still a very talented team. And as I say, I've got them in fourth. I haven't got much to say about New York Rangers, really. They are what they are. They will probably be competitive, but this probably is last chance saloon for them. Third, I have the Florida Panthers. On the face of it, the Panthers are still a very good team. I think looking at that top two lines, probably one of the best top two lines in the league, in the East, sorry. However, they lost a lot of talent in terms of depth, with like the likes of Kevin Stenlund and Ryan Lomberg leaving, Nick Cousins leaving, and so that the depth just isn't quite there anymore. I mean, Anton Lundell's a good re-sign. He's a young guy who will be kind of important for them going forward. Evan Rodriguez is very underrated. I thought he was excellent in the playoffs last year. But obviously the big news was what they lost in defense with Brandon Montour and Oliver Ekman-Larsson leaving. Yes, Gustav Forsling was very good last year. I'm a big fan of Aaron Ekblad. I think Nico Mikkola was very good last year, but beyond that, it's all a bit The other thing that you have to consider with Florida is we are probably due a bad year from Sergei Bobrovsky. He went very deep, obviously, with the playoffs last year for a second consecutive year. And like, how many years can you get out of Bob like that? They've traded away Anthony Stolarz, which means that I believe it will be Spencer Knight backing up Sergei Bobrovsky. I mean, Knight was good when he was called upon in the past, but I just think this Florida team's going to regress just slightly. I also find it hard to... I would be very surprised if Sam Reinhart is a 57 goal scorer this year as well. I think you'll see a slight regression, but not a significant one. I think they've managed to retain a lot more of their core than, say, Carolina did. And because of that, I obviously still have them finishing third and second in the Atlantic. Okay, second in the East, I have the Toronto Maple Leafs, and I also have them winning the Atlantic, which isn't what I have a bet on, because I have a bet on Boston, but obviously, who knows with Swayman. Yes, I have got Toronto. I actually quite like this Toronto team. I think it'll be interesting to see how Matthew Nyes gets on now on that top pairing. William Nylander, I mean, they're very good. Nick Robertson was signed back up this offseason after a bit of hoo-ha surrounding him staying in Toronto. Bobby McMahon was quite good last season. So they're deep. They're, three-line deeps as a team. The big question is Austin Matthews going to continue to score at a 70-goal clip? I mean, he might. I wouldn't be surprised if he does. But he's also had issues with playing a full season. And if he does go down injured, Toronto would be in big trouble. The one thing that Toronto didn't have last year was defense. They were very wobbly defensively. You had Morgan Riley, and I think Simon Benoit had quite a good year. They weren't very good on defense. So, you had the likes of Lyubushkin and Joel Edmondson. Bringing in Tanev, bringing in Oliver Ekman-Larsson. This is a very good defensive group now. 3 very solid defensive pairings. 3 very good offensive lines. The only question mark for me in terms of Toronto being cup contenders is their goaltending. I think Anthony Stolarz is a very good pickup. And, he was very good behind Bobrovsky last year in Florida. While I have my doubts about Joseph Woll, I wouldn't be shocked if Stolarz took the net this year in Toronto. And Stolarz, he's a guy who could be a decent number one. I can't remember if he's had an opportunity as a number one, but he would be a good alternative. I think he's the kind of guy who could be a number one. I think this Toronto team's very strong, and I think that they are one of 2 teams in the East, maybe 3, that have a realistic chance of actually winning the Cup. I do think the Western Conference is generally a stronger conference, but I do think there are a few teams in the East that could legitimately win it. Obviously, the reigning champions are from the East, so the East has got a good history of winning it. However, it's also been 58 years since they won anything. And so to cap off the East, I have done the rookie thing of naming New Jersey as my number 1. Part of the reason is it would just be great vibes. I mean, you would have New Jersey and Toronto potentially battling it out for number 1 in the East, which would pit Sheldon Keefe against his former employers. I just really like this New Jersey team. I think they did really good work in the off-season. They've strengthened themselves just generally. They've not done anything overtly flashy. I think Stefan Nason's an underrated guy. No, like, out-of-the-park type players. Hughes, the Hughes brothers are obviously very good. Obviously, Luke Hughes is out. Just they have 4 very solid lines. They're not overly spectacular. I do think that Jack Hughes is going to have a bit of a sort of superstar season as long as he stays fit. You know, Tatar Hershey, you've got Dawson Mercer, who's a very good player. He's showing a lot of potential. The only real concern is how good the defensive group is going to be. Dougie Hamilton obviously coming back will be a massive boon. I mean, big part of what their issues were last year was because of losing Dougie Hamilton and not getting the goaltending to help. Dougie Hamilton returning is going to be a massive boost for that defensive group, but Siegenthaler on the top defensive pairing. Brendan Dillon coming over from Winnipeg and Brett Pesce is a decent pickup. I mean, they've got Simon Nemec on the 3rd defensive pairing. I'd be very surprised if he was down on the 3rd. I just think, along with the Markstrom signing and being supported by Jake Allen, I do think this New Jersey team is actually going to be the pick of the East. With that said, Jacob Markstrom has had bad seasons in the past, and it's more than possible he has a bad season this year. And if he has a bad season, you could easily foresee another year where New Jersey go from expected heroes to zeros. They're an interesting team. They're kind of a boom or bust team. They're a team that could be very good. They could be a team that just do nothing. I suspect that though that Markstrom and Allen will be far better than what they started last season with. And if Dougie Hamilton stays fit, they will just be a generally better team. And because of that, I'm going to have them as first in the East, and obviously as a result, first in the Metropolitan.